We, as a culture, must conventionalize and believe that today is whatever it is, November 5th or 6th, 1988. But some of us are living in the 21st century, and some of us are living in the 18th century. And the goal, is to try and move all this forward. This is why it's funny, certain themes that have emerged in the Western mind are, in fact, very psychedelic. And one of them is the notion of progressivism, which is a pretty Western idea and quite psychedelic. It's the idea that things are getting better, or that things can get better. Most societies look backward toward a paradigm of a past paradise, and all effort is toward recovering this paradise. We're the only people who have this faith in progress, and it's quite strong in us, so strong that we barely question it. I remember the first time I was in Karachi, Pakistan. I was being hauled around the city in a rickshaw drawn by a guy with bare feet. I mean, it was a human-powered machine, and he spoke English, and we were scoring hash and this and that, so we got to know each other. And he said, in Pakistan, we understand what is wrong with the world. And I said, so what's wrong with the world? And he said, progress. That's what it is. We have to stop progress, which for me was quite a revelatory idea. This thing about time, though, is very interesting and operates on many different levels. Ultimately, I think what the psychedelic experience may be is a higher topological manifold of temporality. That the reason it is so puzzling and so familiar, so alien and so exalting, is that it is in fact mundane. It is in fact just us, but us sectioned through some higher spatial dimension. And if, for instance, you think about magic for a moment, let's think about the major identifiers of the magical act, such as psychic surgery, where your hand is plunged through the wall of the body cavity of a human being, and a tumorous organ is taken out, and no wound is visible. A typical and form of folk magic, much discussed. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Or the more typical, or another form of magic, stage magic in this case. A word is written on an envelope, and then the envelope is locked in a box, and the blindfolded magician is able to tell the audience what the word is in the envelope in the box. And these things are miraculous. We cannot conceive of how they could be done. But if you allow the possibility of a higher spatial dimension, then these things become trivial, because it means the body is open. There is a way to that from the point of view of this higher spatial dimension, the inside and the outside of the body are on the same side. So no problem is posed by removing this organ. Likewise, from the point of view of a higher spatial dimension, the locked box is open on one end, the end that is intersecting that dimension. So the way you read the message is you just go over and look. It's completely trivial. A way to make this cogent for people who are now thoroughly confused is to recall Edwin Abbott's fantasy Flatland, where he imagined a world of two dimensions, where a house was what in our world is what's called a blueprint. And that was all you needed, was the blueprint. And you could live in the blueprint because you walked in, and once you had closed the door, no one in Flatland could come through that blue line and get at you. But of course, to those of us in three dimensions, We just lean over and look at the blueprint and put your thumb in the inside of Flatlander's living room, and from his point of view, from out of nowhere, an enormous thumb has magically appeared in his living room. Well, this shows how perfectly mundane situations on one level appear to be absolute violations of natural law on another level. And this is happening very much in the psychedelic experience because the mind is the cutting edge of the evolving event system. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the idea of this race that we're in between apocalypse and some kind of transformational event, and how your experience in altered states has led you to believe or feel that there's some hope for changing that, and why?
Well, I think it's clear that we're in a race between apocalypse and breakthrough. And I suppose breakthrough is the dark horse. Everything seems to be set up to favor apocalypse. It has the inside track. Except, of course, very few people would own up to saying that they personally want to die. You know, so why is it, if none of us really want to die, why is the overwhelming global cultural image one of inevitable catastrophe? I'm very optimistic. I really think history was for a purpose. I would not have not had it. I think it was useful, and that we must have learned something very important. What we learned that was so important, I'm not sure, but probably when we need it, we'll have it. I mean, maybe we need atomic weapons because a large object will be detected hurtling toward Earth. And if nature had not split off the monkeys 100,000 years ago and evolved intercontinental missile thermonuclear weapon delivery systems that we could use to destroy that asteroid, then all life on Earth would die. So what appears to us madness, our own dedication to the release of larger and larger amounts of energy for no purpose other than to destroy ourselves, is suddenly rescued from pathology and shown to be this tremendously foresightful thing, and thank God we did this because otherwise we'd all be dead and everything else would be dead. I don't seriously believe that, but I do think that we must have learned something very, very important. Perhaps cybernetics come in here. Perhaps this exoskeleton of mnemonic material that allows us essentially to freeze and record our entire culture. Everything is going into the data banks. One way of thinking about what's going on is compression of information. And history represents a compression of information magnitudes more accelerated than the evolution of life. And then 20th century history represents an even greater information compression. Information finally compressed to such a degree that it's like the singularity inside a black hole. You know, a black hole has at its center a place where the equations don't sum. In other words, where it doesn't make any sense. And the only conclusion you can reach is that at that point of so-called infinite compression or singularity, another universe bursts into being somewhere else in a greater and vaster cosmology. And then the energy equations balance. Well, it's as though mind is undergoing this kind of gravitational collapse, and information is being compressed to such a degree that eventually it will not all fit in the present. And then the information begins to move off into the only dimensions available to it, which are the past and the future. Exactly as if you fill a glass with more water than it can hold. Once it has more water in it than it can hold, the water begins to flow down the sides and out into the larger domain. And so I think that people who try to use history, which is usually male egos and male-dominated institutions, are actually tremendously frustrated. We don't see it that way because to us it looks like they win every battle because they win every election. But because they win every election, it is their job to manage the situation. It's a case of you want it, here it is. And they have not a clue as to how to manage it. So their thing is all about the headaches of ownership, while our political point of view is pretty much about the headaches of disenfranchisement. But I think that there is some kind of event ahead of us in time, not far, on the order of 20 to 40 years, that is casting an enormous shadow back through the lower dimensional slice of being, which we call history, so that religions and mystical visions and the visions of revolutionary leaders are a response to flickering intimations of this transcendental object that is pulling intelligence out of the organic matrix of life on this planet in a process that is occupying 50 to 100,000 years. It's extremely unusual what's happening, and a process that creates a series of self-transforming bootstrap steps in a period of 100,000 years means it's a unique kind of phenomenon. There's never been anything like it on the planet. What it is leading toward is hard to say, but I know that its values are the values of life, connectedness, primacy of experience, and caring. And it is using the historical process to wire us all together in some way. Control mechanisms are spreading through the society at an enormous rate. You know, it's interesting, one of the horror fantasies of the 1950s, which was when, you know, this conservative, straight, crew-cut point of view was really at its height. One of the fears of the future that people would just toss off offhandedly was, well, in the future, machines will take over and run everything. And this notion of the control of the planet wrested from the sure hands of noble human beings and instead betrayed into the power of calculating automatons was a great science fiction theme of the 50s. But it's interesting how impartial computers are. They are not ideologues. They are not, they're managers. And remember, I said the struggle was between the shaman manager and the ideologue politician. And so I think the cybernetic matrix is a tremendous tool for feminizing and radicalizing and psychedelicizing the social matrix. I see computers as entirely feminine. I mean, people have a reaction to this because they think that because men spend a lot of time around them and seem obsessed with them, that somehow it isn't feminine. But men have always been obsessed with the feminine. I mean, I think it was D.H. Lawrence who said what life is really about is men keeping women from ever suspecting how truly obsessed we are by them. So I think that this linking together, feminizing, cybernetic thing is part of the anticipation of this object at the end of time. What seems to be happening is we're all flowing together. When we keep talking about unity, globalism, completion, well, you better, you're going to get what you ordered. And I think what it means is probably the dear individual, which, don't be fooled, is a soft description of the male ego run rampant. The democratic individual, the citizen, this notion is in fair peril to be replaced by the person, which is a much more nubbly kind of concept. The person is not an interchangeable part. The citizen is. The citizen is a model of society based on the industrial revolution of the 18th century. But the person is a harking back to a pre-print model, and this is being set loose. It's what the hippies were, essentially. What they were trying to evoke was this do your own thing idea. But there's a paradox here. The do your own thing idea is somehow leading to this vectoring toward a unified cultural state where everybody is involved in everybody else. It's all right that it's paradoxical because there's no reason that it should be reasonable. Yeah.
I wonder if you could address the difference between the LSD experience and mushroom experience, if there is a difference, and also your feelings about marijuana as an older state.
Well, the LSD experience is, I speak only from my own experience, of course, but to me it seemed more psychoanalytical than psychedelic. I was in my early 20s when I encountered LSD. Maybe I had more stuff, as they say, to deal with. But it was not a reliable visionary drug for me. It caused me to have funny ideas. It seemed mostly to be a thought thing, but not a visual thing. And somehow in my education, somewhere along the way, I had picked up this bias in favor of the visual channel. I wasn't satisfied with LSD. I wanted those things that Havelock Ellis describes, where he talks about, jeweled ruins and phosphorescent maidens in diaphanous gowns howling demon songs beneath a violet moon. And that was what I wanted, not funny ideas. And what I found, and I worked pretty diligently at it with LSD, I found that my most satisfying LSD experiences were while smoking hash. And that really did do something interesting, sent it skittering off in these wonderful visionary directions. But these things do have characters. And this is something probably worth talking about in this group, that at low doses, everything seems like everything else. In other words, a little mescaline, a tiny amount of LSD, a little bit of MDMA, a tiny tad of psilocybin. All of these things simply register as wired, arousal, eager to hear what's being said and follow the thread of the argument, and just absolutely fascinated by what's going on, no matter what's going on. But as you raise the dose, the character of these things begins to appear. And, for instance, psilocybin is, to my mind, in many ways, the most anomalous. Because, number one, this thing about how it speaks, it does speak. and none of the others do. I mean, the others you may occasionally, in years of fiddling, get a sentence or two, but the mushroom just is voluble. It just comes on and raves, and sometimes and people have said to me, it really does rave. I mean, it's not a calm, it's not a go with the flow rap. It's rap about planetary destiny and the next 10 million years and the last 10 million years, and, it's this trumpet blast, Cecil B. DeMille, hyper, real like that. Well, then something like ayahuasca, which is this thing these shamans use in the Amazon basin that's based on DMT and monoamine oxidase inhibitors, you take that and it's about the rivers and the jungle and these people and their humility and dignity, and your humility and dignity, and the earth and plants and life and water and sunlight, and it's this totally earthbound, terrestrial, life-affirming thing. And it does not speak, but it's an eye, and its language is visual. And after an ayahuasca trip, you just feel like your eyes are literally bulging out of your head. I mean, you've spent 6 hours looking, just, not really doing anything else but looking. Well, then something like Datura has this watery, magical, forgetful, kind of witchy, occult quality. It's, shadows, and a peculiar quality of erosion of your own attention, so that, no matter who you are, you find yourself wandering through empty colonnades and under a sky pregnant with the possibility of rain. I mean, it's this strange De Chirico-esque kind of landscape. DMT has another quality. It seems to convey you into just a world of utter outrage, where all linguistic, sensory, and analytical machinery is just brought to a screeching halt. So it's important to learn what you like and to learn what you can put up with. Someone at a recent weekend who takes mushrooms quite religiously and quite regularly, and I said, does it ever get easier? And he said, no, it never gets easier. Each time, what I pray as I go into it is, please let me be able to stand a little bit more. Because, finally, it is the real mystery. So the only way your relationship to it can end is by you averting your gaze. Because no human being can gaze into it endlessly, because it is, it is what it says it is. It is the other. I was groping for the Hebrew, but not finding